Hey there folks, it's Juno here. I want to talk to you. I know it's rare, but I've got in front of me a couple of pictures. Well, a picture and a document. One of the pictures, it's got a bullet on it. You will know what a bullet looks like. I don't need to explain it. The other side, we've got some words. Words are important. The reason these words are important is because what they do is they describe some of the principles behind this manufacturing philosophy, I suppose you could say, called just-in-time. So, just-in-time, developed by the Toyota company sometime in the 80s, and it's a manufacturing technique that kind of is there to streamline and improve efficiency of the manufacturing practices they had at Toyota at the time, try and give them some guidance on making their manufacturing process more effective, something that was going to beat the competition and be better. And what they came up with is this concept of just in time. Everything's just in time. And so things don't sit in warehouses. Things don't have to worry about, the long-term logistical implications of something. You make sure that everything converges at the right point, and that provides you with the least downtime. I think, at least I understand that to be the case. The bullet basically is the same principle, okay? So for a long time, firearms, there's a huge progression to firearms that incrementally changed over time. But the important thing to understand about the bullet is what it did was it took a laborious process that was done while firing. So the idea from before would have been like a musket, for example, where you have all the components of the bullet minus the casing, and you're just manually adding one by one into the firing mechanism, whatever that is, like the musket or the cannon, and then you shoot your load, and then you do it all again. So it's this idea that was the process, and it became realized that actually what you could do is you could prepackage all of that. Like, you didn't have to do that there and then. But it took hundreds of years for someone to figure this out. Like, this was not a quick development. It took a long time for somebody to understand the mechanisms and the technique and just the possibility of putting this all together before you needed it. And the thing I want to draw between these two is I think they actually have a lot in common. But they're both, at the moment, at least as far as I understand, up until very recently, have been kind of at the limit of our development as far as we've gone for something that we can mass produce and reproduce in reality reliably as a functioning system. What I think is important about this is that they both factor in this idea of there is a specific time something has to be done. Whereas in European battlefields or whatever across the world, when they were using muskets, they would do all this fighting throughout the day, the lines of guys shooting at each other, then sitting there and reloading, and it would take like a minute, or maybe they'd get like a few shots off in a minute, and it became more important over time. Or maybe we can get more shots off, maybe we can do more. What they began to realize was there is only a certain point in which the action is happening, in which something significant is happening. There is a very restricted window where you need to be doing all of your activity, whatever it is. And the more of it you can do in that window, the more effective you will be. So what we can do is we can outsource the activity we would have otherwise done in that window somewhere else that wasn't necessary. So the activity we were doing in that window, basically the time we were wasting in that window, that we weren't doing all of the important killing stuff, we were just sitting there reloading and doing all this other rubbish, we could outsource that to another time. We could prepare for that. We could put the bullet and the charge and everything all together outside of combat and just bring it ready. Excuse me. Just in time is the same thing. It's the same idea. It's this concept that, alright, in manufacturing you can do that too. You don't need to have warehouses full of individual components and then call one up as you need it, or make a delivery of 100 of them at the beginning of the week and just see how many you get through. No, what you do is you make calls on demand for the actual parts as they're needed, and you make predictions into the future on exactly how many parts are going to be required at different times through using a series of checkpoints. And then you're able to make sure that nothing's ever sitting idle. It just comes together as needed in the moment so that things are produced and then off the line as quickly as possible. Because again, there's this understanding that there's actually only a very defined period where something important needs to happen, that these things need to come together. You want to waste as little time in the defined period of important action while things need to be in motion, rather than having to distribute your energy amongst other things that are simply not the pivotal action in that moment. My curiosity is, where else can this apply? These two things war and industry don't seem like two, maybe they do a little bit, but they don't seem like easily equatable or similar functions in society. However, both of these have come to sort of a similar conclusion about the best way to do something. And again, not saying this is the final form, not saying this is the end level boss of how these things are going to be, but it does seem like they've moved in the same direction. And again, I'm curious to know, maybe this is a natural function of some sort, where we need to displace our time, where we prioritize certain activities for only certain periods, and then try to make investitures of time in other things at other times. Because you can argue that, let's say making a bullet took, I don't know, an hour, but loading a bullet, if you had to do it piece by piece like a musket, takes you a minute. The problem would be is that, let's say you're going to shoot 100 bullets in that battle. Okay, you've only got X amount of time to do it. If your aim is to shoot that 100 bullets, you don't mind investing all that time before, all those hours before, even if you could do it faster in the moment. Because the truth is then, you would still have to distribute more time to doing those functions rather than doing the action that is actually important in that time period. And that time period is all that matters. Let's take another example. Let's say we're making a sale. We're salespeople, something like this. We're making a sale. It doesn't matter how good your selling is unless you're talking to a buyer. It just doesn't matter. You can sit there, and if you have to do all of the system navigation, or set up the account, or do all this rubbish, if you had to do that with the buyer there, you're essentially wasting your opportunity to make that sale because you're doing all these other functions. All right, it's not just in time. It's sort of this laborious task of, well, there are some of these things I could have done before you even walked in the door and had things prepared. But because I haven't done that, and I've instead tried to fit everything into the time in which you and I are talking, I'm saying a sale, but you could extend that to, a sale, what is a sale really? It's a kind of an agreement. You're trying to convince someone of something. If there's any element of rhetoric, it could be exactly the same deal. Like, you're trying to convince them of something. It's no good going into the conversation and trying to determine the facts as they are in that conversation with someone while you're doing it. Oh, like, what is the... maybe you're talking about tax reform or something, and you're trying to calculate, what is your tax, and how much do you spend on this, and how much do you spend on that. It'd be so much better to go in with averages. To just go into that conversation knowing, well, the national average for expenditure is this. Like, then you don't have to sit there doing all the math and losing them from the discussion you're having, making these essential deviations from the activity you're really interested in that's going to produce an actual effect. And that's what it is in a war scenario. If you sit there having to reload constantly, you're deviating from any action that actually produces the end effect of defeating the enemy. And if you're in an industrial environment, if you're sitting there doing other things other than putting the pieces together on the production line, if you're actually doing other things that could have been done at a different time, and instead you're doing those other things when the production line is running, you're holding the production line up. You're not producing per hour as many as you could, and that hits efficiency and productivity. So there was just a few examples. I'm curious to know, is this a system that's reproducible in other environments beyond just the few I've thought of? Is it where actually all effect comes from a very limited space of time, and it's how you utilize that exact time that determines your effectiveness, and all the time you do other things maybe doesn't contribute that much at all, or you could spend preparing for the time that is effective, that is valuable. Alright. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed that. See you around.